Oh, the guy that was told to surrender.
Don't steal my thunder.
It's like one of my favorite stories.
It's a great story. Okay, but I gotta set it up. You know what I mean?
Okay. Yeah.
You gotta set that story up and kill it. Okay, see how you can judge me. You can judge me on how I do. All right. Okay, so you guys talked about the hedgerows yesterday, I believe. Okay. One of the things kind of interesting. I bet you didn't know this. When we start, so this is what we're going to see going across France, guys. So obviously you've got your first waves that come in, right? Those guys that are winning the Battle of Normandy, the guys that were on the beaches, like those guys become battle-hardened soldiers. You understand? The 101st Airborne, which has fought in North Africa. They fought in Sicily. They fought in Italy. They fought at Normandy. They're going to be going across France. Okay? But a lot of the new guys, like the ones that come, 6 weeks after the Battle of France has started, they're not going to see much combat. They're basically going to walk across France. Okay? And a lot of times, you'll see this using, these are infantrymen. Okay? So the tank is being used as protection. Okay? Air power is used, especially when needed and when the skies are clear. When the skies get cloudy or winter sets in, there's snow, the air superiority goes away, okay, which will be a thing here coming up today, okay? Now, one thing you'll notice about the Sherman tank, it's got a little extra something on it, and it's at the front. Remember those hedgehogs on the beaches of Normandy? They're going to cut those apart and weld them on the front of the tanks to cut through all the shrubbery and all the hedges, just kind of as an additional, so stuff doesn't get caught up in treads as much and so forth. Here's another picture of that. You can see a bunch of shrubbery and stuff in the teeth there. Okay, kind of a cool thing I learned about. But anyhow, guys, one of the things is, remember Patton? Patton lost his army, yeah? And they use them as a diversion at Dover. Make the Germans think that that's where the invasion's coming. And so Patton's going to get an army back. This time it's going to be the Third Army. He's not getting the First Army back. He'll take command of the Third Army, right? And he gets command of this just prior to D-Day. And so in the movie Patton, it opens with a speech that Patton gave to the 3rd Army, 6th Armored Division. And it's really Patton-esque. Okay? So Patton is considered one of the greatest generals of World War II. His reckless and outspoken manner gained him friends and enemies of equal determination. During the war, he led troops to Morocco, Tunisia, Sicily, took command of the 3rd Army, leading troops through German lines at Normandy to traverse France. His toughness on his enemies, as well as his own men, okay, earned him the nickname Old Blood and Guts. Okay, I don't think that's a name that, a nickname that I'm gonna die with or anything like that. Any of you guys ever heard of a guy named Don Racine? You guys know Jacob Racine? It's his grandfather. Okay, he taught here for like 30 years. He was the PE teacher, so every freshman boy had Don Racine. Okay, and they were scared crapless of this guy. I mean, he is a mean, big guy, mean, rough Jersey guy. Okay, he's got that Jersey accent, and that guy gave out more demerits at this school than anybody in the history of the school. Okay, like 2 times as much as anybody else, or 3 times. Like, he's the guy at the lunch line, like Blanton's doing now, okay? But it's Racine, okay? And so freshmen, feared him. As sophomores, they hated him. By the time they were seniors, everybody loved him, okay? Because they understood him, okay? That what he was doing was for their benefit, okay? People hated Patton. They love Patton. You know what I mean? It's a love-hate thing. Okay. But this speech that he gave to the 6th Armored Division is kind of fantastic. So I'd like to read it to you. Indulge me. We're a Catholic school here. There's a little bit of language in this. Okay. Now, boosting's been around for some of my pregame speeches. Normally, I don't get too riled up because I like to keep things kind of steady. But there are times where you've got to get in people's ass. This is one of those. A general talks to his army. Now, I want you to remember that no bastard ever won a war by dying for his country. You won it by making the other poor dumb bastard die for his country. Men, all this stuff you heard about America not wanting to fight, wanting to stay out of the war is a lot of horse dung. Americans traditionally love to fight. All real Americans love the sting of battle. When you were kids, you admired the champion marble shooter, the fastest runner, the big league ball players, the toughest boxers. Americans love a winner and will not tolerate a loser. Americans play to win all the time. I wouldn't give a hoot in hell for a man who lost and laughed about it. That's why Americans have never lost and will never lose a war, because the very thought of losing is hateful to Americans. The Army is a team. It lives, eats, sleeps, fights as a team. This individuality stuff is a bunch of crap. The bilious bastards who wrote the stuff about individuality for the Saturday Evening Post don't know anything more about real battle than they do about fornicating. Now, we have the finest food and equipment, the best spirit, the best men in the world. You know, my God, I actually pity those poor bastards we're going up against. My God, I do. We're not just going to shoot the bastards. We're going to cut out their living guts and use them to grease the treads of our tanks. We're going to murder those lousy Hun bastards by the bushel. Now, some of you boys I know are wondering whether you'll chicken out under fire. Don't worry about it. I can assure you, you will all do your duty. The Nazis are the enemy. Wade into them. Spill their blood. Shoot them in the belly. And when you put your hand into a bunch of goo that a moment before was your best friend's face, you'll know what to do. Now, there's another thing I want you to remember. I don't want to get any messages saying that we're holding our position. We're not interested in the holding on to anything except the enemy. We're going to hold on to him by the nose, and we're going to kick him in the ass. We're going to kick the hell out of him all the time, and we're going to go through him like crap through a goose. Now, there's one thing you men will be able to say when you get back home, and you may thank God for it. 30 years from now, when you're sitting around your fireside with your grandson on your knee, and he asks you, what did you do in the Great World War II? Well, you won't have to say, I shoveled shit in Louisiana. All right, now, you sons of bitches, you know how I feel. Oh, I'd be proud to lead you wonderful guys into battle anytime, anywhere. That's all. Dismissed. May 31st, 1944, 6th Armored Division. Okay, so Patton, guys, obviously an egomaniac. He's got this cool silver helmet on. There's his ivory Colt pistol that he carries, dressed to the nines. Okay, Patton's tough son of a gun. Okay, a lot of soldiers hated him. Some loved him, but whether you liked him or not, he was going to push him. Okay, so here we go. Across France, across the hedgerows. So the battle for Normandy lasts roughly till July 24th. So D plus about 7 weeks. Okay, we will control about 1,500 square miles. We have air superiority, so we will be able to bring in around 1 million troops within about 7 weeks. All right? So, you know, that first 300,000 or 400,000, those guys were doing a lot of fighting. By that second half of that million coming in, they're not seeing as much action. Now, by September, guys, we're going to have 3 million troops. And a lot of those guys will just be following behind, walking across France. So on July 25th, General Patton's army strikes out from Normandy, the Third Army. And we will liberate Paris a month later on August 25th, 1945. Excuse me, 1944. Okay, we're still in 44. This is one of the most famous photographs of World War II. This is a photograph of the U.S. Army walking down the Champs-Élysées through the Arc de Triomphe. Took me 14 years to figure out how to say those words correctly. The Champs-Élysées and the Arc de Triomphe. My wife and I went to Normandy. I showed you the pictures, yes. We spent a day and a half in Normandy. We spent 6 hours in Paris. Had dinner on the Champs-Élysées, took a picture of the Eiffel Tower from a distance, and got on a train for Munich, getting the hell out of France. Just wanted to be able to say I saw the Eiffel Tower. Had dinner on the Champs-Élysées. Now, you guys remember Richard Tregaskis, the guy that was the journalist that was embedded with the Marines at Guadalcanal and then went on to Italy and was wounded? One of the most famous war correspondents of World War II was a guy named Ernie Pyle. Okay, and he would write newspaper articles and stuff with the troops, with the army in Europe, and he actually wrote some books on it as well. Guys, when we liberated Paris, the Parisians had been under German control for 4.5 years. Okay, and when we liberated them, guys, they were happy. The champagne and the wine was flowing. Guys, it was a party. It was on. Okay, Ernie Pyle talked about this in his books. He said this. He said, if you were an American GI in Paris when we liberated it and you didn't get laid, there was something wrong with you. Obviously, he's kind of joking around, but you know, he said it was a good time. Okay. I'm going to get fired. Okay. So the Germans are in trouble here. They've lost that's 500,000 troops here, okay, by this point, okay, and huge amount of machinery that they're leaving behind, okay. So, like I said, by September, we will have 3 million men. Now, let me check your knowledge here a little bit, what you remember. On the French side of the border, the French built a massive line of defenses called the what? The Maginot Line. Very good, people. This is my smartest class, by the way. Oh, yeah. You guys, like, as far as the test, like the last test, you guys did way better than us. Yeah.
Get read 0 hour.
Now, the Germans have a line of defenses as well, called the Siegfried Line. Okay, the Siegfried Line. Okay, this is part of that. These are the dragon's teeth I've talked about before. You got more dragon's teeth over here. This is a big gate at the border. You got these huge I-beams we'd have to remove and so forth. So we're getting ready to go into Germany. But the Russians on the Eastern Front have been beating back Germany this whole time, right? And so we've got 3 million Allied troops in France ready to go into the Siegfried Line, while the Russians have almost reached Poland by this time. And in the south of Europe, Russia has taken back Romania and Belgrade. Here we go again. I'm going to check your knowledge. Belgrade is the capital of what country? No. No Yugoslavia. Yeah. It was part of Yugoslavia, this country was. Say it. Nope. Nope. I guess you weren't that smart.
I know.
You're gonna say it, I'm gonna say.
Starts with an S. Serbia.
Oh,
Okay. And then the Germans will dig in at Budapest, which is the capital of Hungary, of which we are all right now, probably. Hungary. Third hour. Then fourth hour eats, and then they come in here and fall asleep. Kill them. Now, guys, a lot of these 3 million Allied troops have not seen any combat. They're green. Okay? So, let's talk about Hitler at this point in time. Hitler is not doing well. You got the Russians on one side, you got the Allies on the other. We're pinching them. They're in trouble. Is there any way that you can see Hitler staying in power? If we take Germany, guys, Hitler's going to die, either by his own hand or by our hand. Is there any way conceivable that he could stay in power and end this war? Like winning? But his army has been depleted. So he's going to make one last desperate attempt to break through either the Russian or the American and British lines, capture as many enemy troops as possible, and then try and get a peace deal to end the war. And then he could give back the prisoners. Okay? Now, which side do you think the Germans would have a better chance? Attacking the Russian troops that have been beating them back all the way from Stalingrad, or these 3 million Allied troops that are American, British, Canadian, New Zealand, Australians, and so forth? It's going to be our lines, the Western Front, because there's so many green troops. Dude, the Russian troops by this time, these guys are battle hardened, like most of them. Okay, and they're pissed because Germany invaded their country. Did Germany invade our country? Germany didn't even attack us. Okay, and they killed a bunch of our guys on the beaches, so we're pissed about that. But yeah, so one last desperate attempt. Before we get to that, we get to November of 1944, and it's time we got to come back across the pond for a what? An election. Roosevelt is going to run for an unprecedented fourth. So 32, 36, 40, and now 44. All right, testing your knowledge again. Who was Roosevelt's first vice president? From Texas. Cowboy boot, cowboy hat wearing Texan. John.
that's
That's
the
a
only
good
thing I
one.
got.
Yeah. John Garner, who said the vice presidency wasn't worth a warm pitcher of spit. So he quit. Roosevelt's second vice president, Henry A. Wallace of the Brain Trust, former Secretary of Agriculture. And as I introduced Henry A. Wallace to you the first time, I told you he was a closet what? Commie. He's a communist. And I'm not making this up, guys. Truly, the guy believes in communism. Okay? Now, the Democratic Party, knowing that Roosevelt is not healthy. Okay, this picture is from Inauguration Day in 1945, January 20th. This is Roosevelt. He's got about 3 months to live. The Democratic Party says, hey, Roosevelt, not trying to be mean here or anything, but you may not survive 4 more years, and we're not going to have a communist become president of the United States. You need to find a different vice president. The Democratic Party told Roosevelt that, or they would not support him for re-election. Back in the old days, guys, the parties chose the candidates. The voters didn't. The voters got to choose who won out of the candidates. Okay? So Roosevelt drops Wallace and adds Harry. Who? Harry. Who? Who is Harry Truman? Nobody's heard of this guy. He's from Missouri. Okay? Roosevelt and Truman, who's a senator, have only met in person like twice. They barely know each other. Okay, it's like back when George Herbert Walker Bush chose his vice presidential candidate, they said, Dan who? Does anybody know who his vice president was? Dan Quayle. And people are like, who is Dan Quayle? He was a congressman from Indiana. Nobody heard of him. They thought he was kind of like this young, good-looking JFK type guy. And once they said that, people mocked him because he was no JFK. Okay, Dan Quayle. All right, but I mean, it's kind of like I don't mean to be guys, like the current vice president. What? Are you serious? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Anyhow, now what you may know is a little presidential trivia here for you. Roosevelt is going to die, right? So Truman's going to become president. So this is a very important pick, okay? There's no period behind the S. Harry S. Truman. We know why? Because S is his middle name. Any of you guys have a family name as your middle name? Like somebody, like a family thing? We did that with our kids? Yeah. So if you can make it through David McCullough's biography on Truman, as I did, you'll find out why his middle name is S. Both parents had a middle name they wanted, family name. Both began with an S. And so instead of arguing about it, they just went with S. S is his middle name. It's not a middle initial. It's a name. Now, guys, think about this. Roosevelt is going to die before we win in Europe, and quite a bit before we win in the Pacific. Okay, so the whole weight of the world is going to fall on Harry Truman's shoulders. Okay, now, when Truman left office, he was one of the most unpopular presidents in modern history, like George W. Bush was. Okay, I believe this is just somebody that teaches history, that Truman did a really good job with what he was faced with, both at the end of the war and post-war especially, because there's going to be a lot of big decisions to be made, okay? And I feel like Truman did a pretty good job. And yes, that's Mr. Ebright praising a Democratic president, okay? You paying attention here? All right, so, smile, that's funny. Okay, so this is his opponent, Thomas Dewey. They made fun of poor Thomas Dewey. They said, Dewey looks like the groomsman on top of a wedding cake, you know, those little figurines, or the Monopoly guy, you know. They made fun of him. He'll lose to Roosevelt, and then he'll lose to Truman later on. Nice guy, though. Okay, so this is Inauguration Day. Truman's in the middle. Roosevelt. Let me introduce you to John Foster Dulles. Okay, John Foster Dulles is going to be playing a big role in our government the next 20 plus years. Okay, his brother, he will become Secretary of State. His brother will become the director of the CIA. So that's kind of a power family right there. They named an airport in Washington, D.C. called Dulles International Airport in D.C. after John Foster Dulles. So I'll bring him up again later after the war. Okay? He's a pretty important guy, but kind of behind the shadows type guy. Shady. CIA. Okay, so here it is. On December 16th, Hitler's going to throw everything he has at us. Over 100 German tanks, 60,000 mechanized vehicles, so trucks, motorcycles, artillery, all kinds. They're going everything at one point in our lines, trying to pick a weak spot to break through our lines and then capture as many American and British troops as they can. This is the largest war in the history of the United States Army. 600,000 Americans, 55,000 British, 500,000 Germans. Over 1,100 tanks. This will be taking place in the Ardennes forest. You can see the density of the forest here, and you can also see the weather. It's December. Now, it's cold, guys. Now, it's not Moscow cold or North Korean mountains during the Korean War cold, but it's freaking cold. And snowing. So like almost exactly when the attack begins, it starts snowing. And it snows for weeks. So our air superiority is neutralized. Sorry, I'll come back. Got to get your attention here. Okay, so this is why the battle is called the Battle of the Bulge. Okay, so this is in military terms. Okay, a mass of force at one point. Okay, so they're putting all their eggs in one basket right here. Massive force here. Okay, now these lines here of American troops are green. These guys have not seen a lot of combat. So they will not break through our lines, but they will create a bulge in our lines of about 40 miles. So initially, this attack goes very well for the Germans. Now, the goal for the Germans is to be strong all the way through here. You can see it kind of getting weaker, and then to capture as many American and British troops as they can. That's the goal, and then sue for peace. Get a peace deal, okay? Now, you might notice this town right here called Bastion. It is, look at all the roads. It's a crossroads town. It's an important town. You might also notice, if you can read really well, you got good eyes, this says 101st Airborne Division. These guys are not green. These guys have fought in North Africa, in Tunisia, Sicily, Italy, and at Normandy. These guys know how to fight. And their general is a guy named General McCulloch. They are not going to give up Bastion. You can see they are completely surrounded. Now, if the Germans knew how few troops we had at Bastion, they would have just overrun us. But McCulloch did the same thing. So when the Germans attacked, they did massive force. Everybody to that point of attack to make the Germans think that there were more of us than there actually were. Hold them off. They come around the rear, attack the rear, massive force to that point. Now, after this goes on for a few days, the Germans have us surrounded. So they send a note, a courier, General McCulloch, saying, you are surrounded. You need to surrender or you will die. So McCulloch gets this note, and he's standing around with some of his aides, you know, some captains and so forth. And he reads this, and he goes, nuts. But we're not surrendering, obviously. What do you think I should write in response to this note? And one of his captains says, well, why don't you just write what you just said? Nuts. So he wrote nuts on there, and they sent it back to the Germans. okay? And they attack again, okay? And they held them off. These are the battling bastards of Bastion, man. The 101st. So if you ever watch Band of Brothers, it's like 9 episodes. It's a long HBO series on the 101st Airborne, okay? Yeah, they show this, okay? It's good stuff. Like, these guys held out. Eventually, the skies started to part a little bit, okay? And they were able to drop in some supplies for these guys. Now, as soon as Patton heard about this invasion, okay, this attack, Patton was down south. Of course, Patton wants to be the hero. So he puts the Third Army on a forced march of over 48 hours straight to get here, to try and cut off this Bulge. Monty is up here in the north. So Monty's going to come down from the north. Patton's going to come up from the south, and they're going to pinch off this Bulge, okay? Save the 101st and capture more than, we'll capture or kill more than 120,000 German troops, which is the bulk of what's left of their army. That's the best of their army is capture or kill. Okay. So the Battle of the Bulge in the winter, so it goes into January. It's about a 4-week war. Guys, this is in the forest, so the casualties for the Americans are extremely high. Remember those German 88s, those flat guns? Exploding those shells in the trees of the forest sends out shrapnel and splinters of wood. We will have 81,000 casualties in this 4-week battle and 12,000 killed in action. Okay. Now, within this battle, there's a lot of stories, obviously. I can't go through them all. The Germans at one point got a hold of some American uniforms and had some soldiers that spoke English that infiltrated some of our camps. You could also tell the story about the Battle of Hurtgen Forest, which is in one of the forests inside the Ardennes. Extremely dense forest, and one of our stupid generals, he wanted to attack the Germans, and he said, we're going through the forest, when they could have gone around the forest and attacked. They went through the forest, and it was a bloodbath for the Americans. We didn't have to do it. We did it. It was horrible. Bad move. Okay. There's so many stories. Now, that video series that I have, World War II in HD, I'm going to show you the story of Rocky Blunt, who's from Massachusetts, from Boston. He's a jazz drummer. Okay. He's drafted into the Army. He's with the infantry, and it kind of tells his story. Okay. We got 15. Okay, good. So I'm going to let you write these down. Okay. And then I'm going to get the video queued up. Okay. Yeah, we should be able to fit this in. I can't show the video on the recording. Sorry, guys.